Hello, welcome to From the South. I'm Laura Prada from the Telesur Studios in Caracas, Venezuela. We begin with the news. Stay with us. We begin in Venezuela, where President Nicolás Maduro has summoned the country's National Defense Council, declaring a permanent session in the wake of the coup d'etat threats. Alongside the Assembly of Representatives of the government, President Maduro declared that they would guarantee the protection of the Bolivarian Republic against any attempt to destabilize the free expression of the people's will in the context of a new phase of United States attacks on Venezuela. He also addressed new elections for the National Constituent Assembly and negotiations with the opposition in Norway.
The country wants the renewal of the National Assembly. It's a special thing of the Security Council. It's something that we're talking about in the Oslo negotiations. Venezuela wants elections to stabilize itself, to recover the time lost, to heal the legislative body wounds.
President Maduro also said that the Council will be in permanent session to counter the threats of further United States-backed coup attempts.
About all, this plan allows us to contain and defeat any destabilization or coup attempt from the United States. We have the power, the conviction, the reason, and the moral right to succeed in doing so. We will ask God to give us the wisdom necessary for this Security and Defense Council to be able to take the initiatives our nation needs.
The president went on to condemn the Venezuelan opposition for allying themselves with the United States and their imperialist aspirations.
Their conspiracy to hurt the country from inside continues, and is entering a phase of madness and exasperation. I denounce North American imperialism and the traitors by their side before the country and before the war. They have entered a new phase of madness and frustration.
And now we change topic because United States Treasury Department has announced harsh new restrictions on travel to Cuba as the Trump administration tightens its blockade against the island. Visits by cruise ships as well as yachts and other passenger vessels will be banned, as will those by private and corporate aircraft. Another popular form of travel to Cuba by educational groups is also now prohibited. Both Cubans and tourists have condemned new sanctions.
Yes, the US people want to come to Cuba. They want to come here for tourism. Cuba is a main stop for cruise tourism. Their main objective is to come to Cuba. And the sanctions are hardening, and they even hurt US people themselves, and us even more. That's why the US government won't be able to do anything here. Nothing is ever going to soften us. That should be clear to Donald Trump.
That's a shame. That's a real shame. The government should do what's best for its people.
He's a businessman, and he always just thinks about money, and he doesn't think about the people and their heart. Yeah.
Now, for more details, we have the following report that sent us earlier our correspondent in Havana, Alien Fernandez. Welcome, Alien.
Here in Cuba, there has been a strong condemnation of these measures taken by the US Treasury Department, which bans visits to Cuba by educational groups from the United States. The Trump administration is also blocking cruise ships from visiting Cuba, and this is very important. The Cuban president said on Twitter that his country will not be cowed or distracted by these new threats, and that the Cuban people will respond with more work, more creativity, and more resistance. For his part, the foreign minister, Bruno Rodriguez, condemned the measures, which he said tighten the blockade against Cuba. He said Washington is trying to strangle the Cuban economy and damage the living standards of the Cuban people to try to wring concessions from the Cuban government. But he was clear that this attempt would fail once again. Since Donald Trump arrived in the White House, we should remember that the campaign against Cuba has been stepped up dramatically. The most recent measure before this was the application of Title III of the Helms-Burton Law, which allows U.S. individuals and entities to sue Cuban and foreign companies in U.S. courts for the use of properties nationalized by the revolution. Last week, the head of U.S. affairs at the Cuban Foreign Ministry, Carlos Fernández de Cosio, said that until recently it was possible to talk about a setback in relations between the United States and Cuba, but that this had now turned into open hostility and aggression on the part of the U.S. administration.
Thank you, Alien. And as United States President Donald Trump continues his state visit to United Kingdom, protests have taken place in central London. Thousands have turned out in opposition to U.S. President and his highly controversial policies. Politicians from the opposition Labour Party as well as the Green Party and various social movements spoke at the rally and expressed their distaste at Trump being revered with a state visit. They said they don't believe he deserved that honor.
You know, even today he's going to say that he didn't see any protests. There were no protests against him. For us, it's important to keep coming out here and showing that, like, you can keep lying and you can keep saying that there aren't people that disagree with you, but there's an enormous amount of people that want him to know that there are people that disagree with him, and we're going to keep coming out until he gets that message.
And addressing the anti-Trump protesters, the Labour Party leader Jeremy Corbyn called for an end to racism, misogyny and religious persecution. He added that mobilizations against political extremism demonstrate the people's determination for positive change.
So I say to our visitors that have arrived this week, think on, please, about a world that is one of peace and disarmament, is one of recognizing the values of all people, is a world that defeats racism, defeats misogyny, defeats the religious hatreds that are being fueled by the far right in politics, in Britain, in Europe and the United States. Do you know what? Together we can make a big difference. Together we can change this world. Together we can bring about that peace and justice. And by our demonstration here today, we've shown just how determined we, all of us, are to achieve that better place and that better world. Thank you for being here today for peace, for justice and disarmament.
Meanwhile, during a joint news conference with outgoing Prime Minister Theresa May, Trump once again took aim at the Mexican government, which he accused of not doing enough to stop what he called an immigrant invasion.
Mexico has something to prove, but I don't want to hear that they're run by the cartels. You understand, you report on it all the time, a lot of people do. That would be a terrible thing. Mexico should step up and stop this onslaught, this invasion into our country.
Trump comments come just as the Mexican Foreign Minister Marcelo Ebrard is in Washington to hold talks in the issue of immigration and the threats of tariff made by President Trump. Mexico's foreign minister said he hopes to find common ground with U.S. officials.
We are going to present a comprehensive vision about tariffs and migration, but the main issue tomorrow is about migration and proposals from Mexico and concerns from the United States, and we are going to find out a common ground, I think.
We're preparing for the scenario that tomorrow we can have a successful negotiation. This is Mexico's hypothesis and what I think will happen, but if we don't reach a negotiation after tomorrow, we could then give you a clearer vision of what Mexico's next steps will be, and we will then see how the U.S. Congress decisions are evolving.
With this, we go to a first break here from the South. Make sure you follow us on Twitter at Tulsa English and on my account, of course, at Laura Piteles. Stay with us. Sudanese opposition have rejected the ruling Transitional Military Council move to cancel all agreements made with the leaders of the popular protests in the country, describing the military actions as counter-revolutionary.
We, in the Forces for the Declaration of Freedom and Change, refute the statement from the leader of Sudan's Transitional Military Council in every detail and also in its form and its content. We consider it as a statement of a coup and a counterattack on the people's revolution. We refute it all from its beginning to the end. We refuse to call for an early election, and we consider the statement of the Military Council conforms with the counter-revolution and is linked to the interests of the old regime. And therefore, the leader, General Abdel Fattah Burhan, is trying to call for early elections in the presence of the deep state and the control of the National Congress Party and its remnants in some institutions. They want elections to be conducted in the presence of an inappropriate environment for a free and fair election.
Our correspondent in Northern Africa, Nayara Tardo, sent us the following report explaining us and giving us more details to understand better what is happening there. Welcome, Nayara.
The president of the Transitional Military Council announced on Tuesday the suspension of all the agreements reached with protest leaders and asked for elections within 9 months. This was announced after tensions escalated and a bloody repression against protesters on Monday outside the main military headquarters in Khartoum, which left 35 people dead and hundreds of people injured. According to the Sudanese Doctors Central Committee, the protests began at the end of 2018 to reject the rise of prices in basic products and food, and then demanded the resignation of President Omar al-Bashir, who was removed from power by the military on April 11th. Al-Bashir ruled for almost 30 years, and after his removal, the protests continued. Now against the military junta imposed after the coup. Protesters insist that power must be transferred to civilians. Meanwhile, the military has closed the main roads and bridges in the city, and access to internet has been blocked to prevent new protests. The UN Secretary General strongly condemned the excessive use of violence by security forces against protesters. The UN Security Council is set to discuss these tensions, which could grow, as the Professional Association in Sudan, a key member of the Alliance for Freedom and Change, called on the people to protest peacefully on Tuesday, the last day of the holy month of Ramadan, and to pray for the martyrs that died during the protest.
And now, thank you, Nayara. And now we move on to the Democratic Republic of Congo, where Ebola cases have exceeded 2,000 according to the World Health Organization. A spokesperson for the organization says increasing security incidents in the country are holding back effective response to the epidemic. Last month, militias attacked a hospital in Butembo City, killing a doctor from Cameroon working for the health agency. The organization has been constantly forced to suspend its activities, and sometimes for a few days at a time, giving the virus the chance to spread faster.
Since the beginning of the outbreak, there were 2,008 cases, including 1,346 deaths. So, for example, yesterday there was 7 new cases being detected. The day before it was more than that.
An inquiry into a controversial police unit in Nigeria has recommended that 22 officers should be prosecuted. The panel looking into the Special Anti-Robbery Squad found evidence of widespread human rights violations by the police. In addition, the panel recommended that the police pay compensation to the 45 people who complained of police brutality. The president, Muhammadu Buhari, on his social media page, shared video footage allegedly showing the aftermath of the police killing a young man. And now we move on to India, where we're currently facing a major heat wave with temperatures are over 50 degrees Celsius. This has led to a significant rise in heat stroke cases as patients are suffering from high body temperature, higher than usual heart rate, cramps, headaches, loss of consciousness, and seizures.
I was vomiting a lot. My whole body was burning and I couldn't go anywhere because the temperatures were so high. It was so hot that I felt like we were carrying something that was burning along with us wherever we go. Our body's temperature is around 37 degrees Celsius and the outside temperature is so much higher. And because there's such a big difference, of course it affects the body and obviously the heat wave is making us struggle.
And now we move on to Europe. In Czech Republic, tens of thousands of people have taken to the streets demanding the resignation of Prime Minister Andrej Babiš over alleged conflicts of interest. An estimated of 120,000 people called on Prime Minister Babiš to resign over allegedly receiving a €2 million European Union subsidy for a farm and convention center a decade ago. Babiš has denied wrongdoing, but protesters fear a newly appointed justice minister could interfere in the case. And the Spanish Supreme Court has ended the government's plan to exhume the dictator Francisco Franco from the Valley of the Fallen. The monument where the dictator is currently buried was forcibly built by the Republican prisoners, but presented as reconciliation following the fascist victory in the Spanish capital. The exhumation was planned for next Monday, but the Supreme Court unanimously ruled to put the plan on hold. The current Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez said that Franco's body would be removed from the monument where it has become a site of pilgrimage for the Spanish far right by summer 2018. However, there have been significant opposition from conservative forces in Spain. Time for a second and very short break. Stay tuned. And we are back and we go to Argentina, where the Supreme Court has rejected a challenge by a multinational mining company to an environmental law banning mining in glacial areas. The Canadian mining company Barrick Gold attempted to have Argentina's glacier protection law prohibiting mining in glaciers and permafrost areas declared unconstitutional. The gold mining giant argued the law could affect its projects near glacial areas in Argentina, but the top court rejected the claim. And the Congress in Peru is debating a motion of confidence presented by the government of President Martín Vizcarra. Vizcarra's Prime Minister Salvador del Solar arrived at the Congress to support the motion. It is part of the president's attempt to push through a package of anti-corruption reforms, which a majority in Congress has been resisting. And if the motion is approved, the laws will then be passed. If it isn't, the president could dissolve the Congress.
It is urgent that we save our democracy from corruption. It is urgent that we prevent people who are guilty of criminal offenses from representing us. It is urgent to strengthen the political parties, encourage committed citizens to play a part in politics, and make it possible for us as Peruvian citizens once again to trust in our authorities.
Now, to know more regarding the vote of confidence in the Peruvian government, we have the following report from our correspondent Jaime Herrera, who was earlier at the Congress in Lima and sent us the following report. Welcome, Jaime.
What is being debated here in the Congress now is of huge interest to the Peruvian population in general. and that is the motion of confidence presented by the government of President Martin Vizcarra. As you'll remember, last year the government called a referendum in which a big majority of Peruvian voters, over 80%, said they agreed with the need to reform both the judicial system and the political system in order to deal with the many cases of corruption in the country. But although that was approved, so far the Congress has made no progress in adopting these reforms. So what the government is doing today is insisting that the Congress approve this motion of confidence, and if it does express its confidence in the administration of President Vizcarra, that would mean it is making a commitment to pass all of these reforms. If it doesn't, then this would be the second time that there's been a vote of no confidence in President Vizcarra, and that means he would have the power to dissolve Congress and call new elections. Now, there are some political groups in Congress who have already said that they will vote against the government's motion of confidence. Among those is the Broad Front group in Congress. And we have with us one of the members of Congress for the Broad Front, Wilbert Rosas. So, Congressman Rosas, why have you decided to vote against this motion?
Although with this confidence motion, the government is putting forward a number of measures that are worthy of our consideration for the reform of the Constitution, it seems to us that these are really just palliative measures. The fundamental issues are not those that are up for discussion at the moment in this constitutional reform. The fundamental question that needs to be addressed in the constitutional reform is the economic question, because the current economic model just allows the rich to get richer while the poor get poorer. They are not discussing the investments in mining that pollutes the environment and harms the population in the mining and oil extraction regions. They are not discussing the damage done to people's health by contamination with heavy metals in those mining centers and in the Amazon basin.
Voting down the confidence motion would give the president the right to dissolve Congress. Are you in agreement with that?
I think we support what the country wants. And what the country wants is that this Congress be closed. Why? Because there is a majority here which not only obstructs legislation and betrays the country, but which governs in the interests of big companies and not in the interests of the people. I think the Peruvian people have realized this, and they want this Congress to be closed down so that a new phase can begin. And that new phase means drawing up a new constitution.
That was Congressman Wilbert Rosas of the Broad Front, which is in favor not only of rejecting the motion of confidence in the government, but also of calling new elections for a new Congress to replace this one that they say should be dissolved. Back to you in the studio.
Thank you, Jaime. And now we go to the Caribbean. The Office of Haiti's presidency has referred to allegations contained in a report which puts President Jovenel Moïse at the center of an embezzlement scheme and described them as a political machination. In a radio interview, the president's political advisor said the figures and data in the report were manipulated. A panel of high court judges on Friday accused President Jovenel Moïse of stealing aid money meant for fixing roads. The president's advisor denies that the companies which benefited from those contracts are owned by Moïse. And members of the Caribbean LGBT community celebrated Pride in their identities at this year's Pride Parade in Queens, New York. Thousands participated in the event, which is its 4th year. Queens-based queer advocacy group Caribbean Equality Project also took part in the festivities, happily displaying pride in their Caribbean heritage and identity. The event also commemorates the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall Uprising, which had seen 6 days of protests and violent clashes following a police raid of the Stonewall Inn, a gay club in New York. Like this, we come to the end of News Free, but you can find this and much more other stories on our website, as you are seeing, telesurenglish.net, where you can read opinion articles, watch the special interviews, and of course, find much more information that we produce especially for you. So you know you can continue with Telesur, connecting the global south until next time. Thank you for watching.